Hi everyone, welcome to our presentation skills workshop. My name is Cindy. I am a fourth year biomed major, and this is my third year at Learning Skills Services. And I'm joined today with my best friend, Raven.
Hello, my name is Raven. I'm a fourth year English and concurrent education student, and I've also worked with Learning Skills Services for the past 3 years, and I'm very excited for today's workshop.
All right, so before we begin, I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement. Although we aren't all in the same location right now, as a member of your community, I would like to acknowledge that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. York acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tkaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis Nation. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So before we jump into the workshop, I just wanted to quickly talk about what Learning Skills Services does. So our goal at Learning Skills is really to help you learn how you learn best and maximize your own learning power. And we do that mainly through workshops, and we have lots of different kinds of workshops like time management, exam prep, reading and note taking, and they happen very frequently. If you attend 8 of our workshops, you earn yourself a passport to success that looks great on your co-curricular record at York and also on your resume. We also offer peer academic coaching, which are half-hour sessions with a learning skills peer like Raven or myself, and that's when you want to delve deeper into a specific topic like time management or preparing for an exam, and we're definitely open for booking that way. We also have the Welcome Desk chat, which is how you access the Learning Commons. The Learning Commons is a collaboration between the libraries, Learning Skills Services, the Writing Center, the Career Center, ESL Open Learning Center. All of these great groups that are physically located all together in Scott Library can be found online at the Welcome Desk chat. I would definitely recommend you check out our online resources, such as the Student Guide to Remote Learning, which has great tips and tricks for how to handle this virtual environment. And also definitely check us out on social media at Student Life by You. Today's workshop, we're going to cover 4 main topics. First is how to structure and deal with the content behind your workshop, then how to prepare for it, how to adapt a good presentation style that suits yourself, and then also how to project confidence and overcome that presentation anxiety.
We have 3 learning outcomes for today. First, participants will know how to prepare presentations, understand how to display content, and be familiar with structuring presentations. Participants will be able to overcome presentation anxiety and project confidence when presenting as a student, student leader, or facilitator. And last, participants will be able to apply their developed presentation skills in their respective and/or future roles. So let's get into today's presentation by first taking a look at content.
All right, so something that's really important to know about the content before you start with the content really is to know your presentation requirements. So know the format of the presentation, know how long you have to do it. Definitely never go over your time limit. It's always not fun when your lecturers go over your actual time slot for the course. So you want to make sure that you're staying within your time limit, but also that you're filling up as much time as you need to. And if you're being marked on this, you also want to know the percentage of the grade. It always helps you with managing your time, knowing how much energy and time to dedicate towards something, and also knows how seriously or how formal this presentation should be. If you're allowed to choose a topic, definitely choose one that is actually interesting to you. It will definitely help you stay motivated, and it's easier for you to communicate that interest to the audience. If you choose a topic that sounds like it'd be easy, but you're really not interested in, it's really hard to find the passion and the time to put in the work into this presentation, and it really does show when you're presenting. Something that we're going to be talking about a lot in this presentation is to research your topic like an essay. So just like you would be writing a paper with a thesis, with arguments, that's how you should think about structuring and preparing for your presentation. Another thing that we're going to talk a lot about is the importance of understanding and not just memorizing. If you were to memorize all the words for your presentation and then stand perfectly straight there and regurgitate everything, it just wouldn't really resonate with your audience. It might be a little bit awkward for yourself. And so it's a lot easier for you to really just be comfortable with your content, know what you're talking about, and then naturally share it with the audience. So format. Format is how you will show what you know and how you're going to organize your presentation. So some things are to consider is whether it is a group or an individual presentation. This definitely has implications on how much time you'll want to spend on things, whether or not you have to divvy up roles, and how you're going to work with others to get the message across. There's also accounting for discussion and audience participation. So sometimes, most of the time, presentations will ask that you involve the audience in some way. It keeps them on their toes, it keeps them interested in your talk, it lets them converse and share ideas, and it always it's a good thing if it takes off the pressure off of you for a couple of minutes so that you can take a breather while the audience shares their ideas and gives you feedback. Sometimes you don't have the opportunity, like for example, in this presentation, we don't get the opportunity to hear from all of you because this is a recording, but that is also something that you want to consider when you are making your presentation. Other formats or some formats that presentations can come in are the regular presentation, which is something like a lecture style where you're standing or you're sitting and you're sharing the information, you're telling the listeners what you want to talk about. But there's also facilitation, which is something that is more like our regular workshops where we try to guide discussion and we sort of lead discussion in between the audience members and between us, trying to get the ball going so that it's less of one person talking and more of a sharing of ideas amongst peers. There's also the debate format, which is sort of like what you see on TV when politicians are debating against each other. But that's when two parties or however many parties are countering ideas off of each other and debating pros and cons off of each. And the last format that I'm going to talk about today is the round table or the fishbowl. And so this one isn't as commonly used in things like school, and you might not be able to implement this in your role as a peer leader, but it is an interesting take on a presentation. How it works is that you're all sort of a group of people are gathered around a circle, they're debating ideas back and forth. It's almost like a mini debate amongst that group, and then the audience can watch that debate going on. And your role as the facilitator is to make sure that everyone has a chance to talk, to share their ideas, and you keep it all sort of rolling. Okay, so content. When you are focusing on your content and what you want to include in your presentation, you want to think like your audience. You first have to understand the audience and imagine yourself in their place. If you are nervous about thinking about yourself as the audience and watching yourself, remember that they are there to listen and to learn, and they're not there to judge you. In class, your peers generally are not out to get you. They want you to earn that grade just like they are trying to earn their grade. And in your peer leadership roles, everyone amongst us are peers, and we are generally there to support you and to learn from you. So never feel like you are being judged. You also do want to know what sort of tone your professor or your audience requires though. So if this is a very serious and formal talk that you're doing for class about some sort of very serious topic, you want to make sure that you're using the appropriate tone in your content and in your words. But if it's something more casual, like in this presentation, it's just amongst peers, then I have the liberty to talk in a more relaxed tone, use more casual words that will really resonate with you guys. You also want to know what content and vocabulary is being expected of you. So if this is for something like a course, you definitely want to use course vocabulary and know why you're doing it, the purpose of the assignment, because you want to earn that grade. But if it is just in general something that you're doing for work as your peer leader, then you also want to include key terms, and you want to make sure that you're accounting for all of the things that you want to portray in your workshop. So our big takeaway here is to understand your audience, put yourself in their shoes, and imagine what they want to take away from this workshop or from this presentation. And now I'm going to hand it over to Raven to talk about how to structure a workshop, a presentation.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Cindy. Like you have said, we want to organize our information or structure it. So how can you do this? First, what you can do is you can create a brief outline and package your information similar to an essay. You want to make sure that you have an introduction, your body paragraph with your evidence, and your conclusion. In your introduction, it's really a good idea to have an attention grabber in order to open your presentation. This can frame the importance of your topic. As well, always include what the theme or the purpose of your presentation is. And depending on the setting of the workshop or the presentation, feel free to include your qualifications if this is something that is appropriate. In an essay, we have body paragraphs. Each one typically has one main point of evidence which we're going to use in our argument. This is the same thing in a presentation, except instead of a paragraph, you're going to divide it up into a number of different slides that are easy to read and accessible. These are the examples and also visuals that are going to illustrate and support your main point or theme that you're trying to make. And lastly, you have your conclusion, where you want to briefly restate what you want the audience to understand or to remember, and really focus on your message. It's okay to repeat this because after sitting through a long presentation, sometimes audience members may forget. So by having your main message repeated in your conclusion, you can really draw back to your main point that you're trying to get across. Next, let's take a look at how to prepare for this presentation. Being prepared helps you to feel in control, relaxed, and motivated. First, what we're going to do is to break it down into small, manageable pieces over a longer period of time, going back to what Cindy said about understanding first and memorizing later. These small, manageable sections are the ones we've just talked about: an introduction, your body, different sections within the body of evidence points, as well as your conclusion. Time management is so important in every aspect of life, especially when you're taking a look at your assignments. Don't leave things till the last minute. Help your future self by planning ahead how much time you think that you will need for this presentation, and give yourself extra buffer time so that you can practice presenting and feel really comfortable with the information that you're saying. Spreading the workload out and making sure that you have enough time to do everything you need until you're perfectly comfortable. Another option that you can prepare is talking aids. Perhaps this is an outline using flashcards. As you can see by looking at our slide here, we have used bold letters to separate our main points from our supporting points. This is something you can also do in your own presentations, so that at first glance, when you're taking a look at your slide to speak, it gives you an idea of what you're about to say next without having to read word from word. As well, it's a great idea to avoid writing out the whole presentation. When you're looking at a slide as an audience member, it can be really overwhelming and sometimes confusing if everything is written out word for word. So try to break things down into small, manageable bullet points that at first glance you can understand, but it's not too overwhelming and text heavy. The next thing for preparation is to practice, practice, practice. Speaking is so different from writing, and listening is so different from reading. Your tone, your vocabulary, how you speak and carry yourself in an essay are completely different than how you would orally. So try and talk it out after you've written out your speaker notes for your content. As well, put yourself in the place of the audience. How much can you absorb by just listening? Perhaps give your audience breaks by breaking it up into discussion questions and really trying to make it an interactive and engaging experience, something that you would enjoy to sit through and listen. And lastly, it's very important to understand your audience. Pay special attention to the opening and the segues in between points. Another thing you can do, especially as we are learning how to learn remotely, is to either video or audio record yourself, so you can go back and you can see what areas you want to improve and what areas you feel very comfortable with how they went. This one I think is probably the most important. If it's possible to do so, practice in the same space that you're going to be presenting in. So if you're presenting on Zoom, making sure that you're very familiar with all of the buttons and different operations you'll have to have screen sharing and being a host, so that when you go into your presentation, you don't give yourself that additional stress of having to figure out the formatting. You've already learned this and you're very comfortable with this. As well, this can be even practicing in the same physical room that you're going to be presenting in. It's one less distraction, and it can help you to be more comfortable with your surroundings so you can give your full, undivided attention to just your presentation. So takeaway 2 is practice, practice, practice. Next, we're going to go into presentation style.
All right, so I'm going to start off this section with a video presentation that I'm going to share with you now, and I'm just going to ask you to give a grade to this presentation and tell me whether or not you would vote for this person.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Starr County Republican Party Executive Committee, good evening, and thank you not only for your attendance, but for allowing me the opportunity to speak. My name is Phil Davison, and I am seeking our party's nomination for the position of Starr County Treasurer on November 10th, November of 2010, excuse me. In terms of my background, I am from the village of Minerva, where I'm serving my 13th year of elected service as a Minerva Council member. In terms of education, I have a bachelor's degree in sociology, a bachelor's degree in history, a master's degree in public administration, and a master's degree in communication.
I'm going to end it off right there at that very ironic statement. But, so think about that for a second. How would you grade this presentation, and would you vote for Phil? I find that Phil was very passionate about his little speech right over there, and you could see that he was very interested in showing how competent he was, and he really did want you to vote for him. But in the way he carried out that presentation or that quick little speech, it was very almost scary. He came off very threatening. He was moving a lot, so he was definitely moving his arms around a lot, and he looked very unprepared. So he was referring heavily on his notes. At one point, he forgot his own credentials, and he had to come back to it just to read out that he had a master's degree in communication or whatever it was. So as you can see, like sometimes there are these little habits that you take on in your presentation style that you don't even really know to be as awkward or to be a little bit threatening. So if Phil had practiced before on something, on someone and gotten the feedback before, or if he had watched himself after a video recording, in which he did come back eventually and look at this recording and found that he did look a lot more threatening than he intended to be. So just little things that you should practice and be aware of before you start off with your own presentation. So how to get that presentation style to be something that you're comfortable at and that you are content with. You definitely want to just be yourself at your best and your most energetic. You want to share yourself with the audience appropriately. So if the context works and you're in an appropriate setting, you want to be able to use personal anecdotes and examples if they fit the topic. Of course, you don't want to overshare, you don't want to get too personal and make an uncomfortable, awkward environment, but especially if it's something amongst peers, it's really nice to share anecdotes. It makes you really relatable, and it's a lot easier to talk about than formal conversations sometimes. You want to mold your delivery style based on the message of your presentation and the assignment requirements. So again, that goes back to making sure that the content of your presentation is suited to the context or why you're doing it. And again, it all goes back to understanding your audience. It's usually okay to use humor if it's comfortable for you. So I've definitely tried at some points to incorporate humor, and then I realized that I just wasn't funny enough, and it was creating so much pressure for me and so much awkwardness that I decided to cut it out and then left in little things like snarky little comments here and there. But that's something that I'm more comfortable with and that I can sort of pull off. Only use humor if it's appropriate to the setting and the topic. So of course, sometimes you are just in a very serious sort of presentation, and sometimes humor just doesn't work, and you want to be wary of that. You want to maintain eye contact as much as possible and be friendly and approachable. So if that's through a Zoom recording or through a Zoom meeting, you want to make sure that once in a while you actually look at your camera or your webcam and not just directly at the slides, especially if you're using dual monitors, because then, for example, if I had a screen over here, I would be talking to the screen, but you would only see half of my face. So that's something to be wary about for online sort of virtual presentations. But also this applies if you're doing an in-person presentation as well. And if so, this is something that you struggle with, I do have some tips on how to maintain eye contact, because sometimes it does feel awkward, especially if you're very nervous. The first tip is to find that friendly face in the audience. There's usually someone out there who's like nodding along and smiling. So look at that one person, and they're going to give you that feedback and validation you need to continue. But if you don't have a friendly face, or you're not comfortable looking at this one person this whole time, you can also just look at the very back wall behind the audience. So look straight over their heads and look at just one spot on the wall, and that will make sure that you're not looking at the slides behind you, that you're not staring at the floor, but at least you're looking somewhere into the audience. You also want to project interest and enthusiasm for your topic. So definitely make sure that you're not boring the audience by putting in that passion and that enthusiasm into the way you're speaking, into the way you're presenting. Visuals. It's important to use appropriate visual aids, whether that be something like a PowerPoint like we have here, a flip chart, a whiteboard, handouts, short videos like we had with the Phil video, or even little sound clips. Sometimes it's okay to not provide physical handouts. It's a good way to save paper, and sometimes it's enough that people take their own notes. But it is also okay to include handouts if that's something that your assignment requires, or that you believe will help people follow along. Whatever visual you choose, though, it's important to keep the style simple and consistent. You want to make sure that there are points and not whole paragraphs, mostly because it's really hard to read a giant paragraph and listen to the person at the same time. So you want to make sure that these are just quick things that you can sort of see off the screen or on the slide relatively quickly and understand the gist of the topic. And not including paragraphs also prevents you from reading off the entire screen. So just having quick points helps you just to recognize where you're at in your presentation and just build off of that out of your own words. You want to be able to use color for emphasis and variety if that's something that works for your presentation style. So for example, here, the red text really pulls out the key points. So even if you aren't reading the black text, at least you have the key ideas, such as being simple and consistent. And you also want to give time for the audience to absorb a slide. So even if it's just a transition slide, you do want to pause for a second, even if it does seem a little bit awkward, because just rolling through the slides really quickly can be a little disorienting for the viewer, especially if there's transitions. So you do want to make sure that you're giving enough time for the audience to absorb the slide, to read through it, and to understand it. So our takeaway here is to focus on your message and use that message to sort of cater how you want to present or use your presentation style. So another key part about presentation style is to have an appropriate body language. You want to maintain an open body language so that you are straight and sort of, not slouching, but also that you're relaxed. It's really awkward when you're really stiff and tense because people can tell, and also because it starts to hurt after a while, and you don't want to start being sore in the middle of your presentation. There's also the importance of facial expressions. You want to show the appropriate emotion to bring home the main points. You want to emphasize key ideas. You want to smile when it's appropriate and sort of be more serious when you have a more serious tone. And of course, there's also the importance of wardrobe. So dress professionally in clean, comfortable clothes, wear a uniform or something like that. Make sure that it's looking okay and that you're not showing what you don't want the audience to see. But in general, you do want it to be just make sure that you are open and that you're comfortable when you're presenting.
The next thing we're going to take a look at is your stage presence. It's really important to own your space and to look confident even if you don't feel it. When you're first getting started with presentations, they can be very scary. So what we suggest doing is fake it till you make it. When I first started presenting, I was so nervous, but then I realized that my audience isn't aware of this unless I make them aware of it. And through time and practicing, I was able to develop that confidence to really help me to own my space. In having good stage presence, it's good to avoid reading straight from your notes or straight from your slides, and to aim for a more conversational style approach to presenting. It's a lot more engaging for an audience if they're able to be involved and participate in your presentation through discussion questions or any other form of student engagement. It just makes it more exciting and motivates them to listen more actively. In looking at visual aids, they're okay to use for a little bit of help, but don't solely rely on them. Make sure that when you're speaking to your audience and not to your visuals, remembering who you're supposed to be presenting to and why. Next, as we've learned from that video with Phil, to try and avoid rocking back and forth while speaking and any other nervous habits or gestures. Sometimes we have these nervous habits such as touching our hands, maybe fiddling with that cue card that we don't even realize that we're doing because we're just so focused on presenting. This is why practicing as well as recording yourself can be so important to having a really good quality presentation so you can pick up on these and try to find ways around them. For example, perhaps if you are someone who tends to fidget nervously, you can give yourself something to hold on to occupy your hands while you get through that presentation. And lastly, avoid the overuse of hand gestures. So now we're going to talk about how to overcome that presentation anxiety and project confidence.
So projecting confidence is really hard sometimes when you are in the middle of a presentation and you're already nervous, and then you have all of these just bundles of nerves. And so it really makes it hard for you to look like you got it all together. And you're not alone if you have a fear of public speaking. I definitely did when I started off with these workshops, but you have to believe that it is possible. You can make a plan and that'll help you be prepared, and that's really going to help you with the nerves. So remember that you can always break a presentation down into manageable sections. So just say, okay, I'm just going to start off with the introduction, and then once you get there, be like, okay, I'm going to explain that, and then just calm yourself down as you go, and don't think about it as a giant presentation that you have to do. Just think about it as a collection of small little things. You want to leave yourself enough time to practice until you're comfortable. Remember, like Raven was saying, practice, practice, practice. It's super important, but just make sure that you have enough time to do so. And prepare an outline to use as a guide when you're speaking. So using an easily readable font size for your outline, boldface or underline keywords so that you can quickly look at them and you're not looking through your cue cards to find that one phrase that you need. And again, avoid writing out that whole presentation. So, presentation anxiety. What is anxiety? So anxiety is a natural response to situations that seem threatening. It's that feeling of extreme worry, nervousness, concern, stress. You are really sort of freaking out. And I'm sure that we've all felt some sort of anxiety in some situations at some point. Anxiety is sort of normal. It's really normal to be stressed out and nervous about things, but it does become a problem when it interferes with your ability to work, study, and just in general enjoy life. And the fear of public speaking is one of the most common of all fears. So if you find yourself sort of shaking and sweating at the thought of doing a presentation, just know that you're not alone. So the idea behind anxiety is this thing called the fight or flight response. And it's a natural physiological response that your body gets when it senses danger. What happens is the blood and the oxygen is redirected to major muscles and to the reflex center of the brain and away from executive thinking, memory, and communication centers of the brain. So if you think about that practically, let's say that you see some sort of line, it's charging at you. At that point, you don't really need to be coming up with eloquent words and doing executive thinking and memory and problem solving. At that point, it's just run and to have quick reflexes. So that's what's sort of happening when you're feeling really nervous about something like a presentation. It is an adaptive and evolutionary response when faced with a true predator, like that lion's charging at you. But obviously times have changed, and I hope that a lion never charges at you. So something like the fight or flight response isn't really necessary, and it's more of a problem when you're just facing something as small as like a presentation. So anxiety happens when we overestimate the threat and underestimate our ability to solve this threat. So it's thinking things like, I know I'll do horribly on this presentation, and then I can't show my face in this class anymore, so I'm going to fail this course. Everyone's going to laugh at me. I can't do this anymore. And it's also an underestimation of your resources and saying things like, I'm totally helpless. There's nothing I can do. Presentations they're not for me, and I just can't do it. So it's the combination of these things that really causes us to make a presentation something so scary and something that we see as danger, and then we feel anxiety towards it. Usual causes of presentation anxiety include things like a lack of confidence, a lack of experience, so just maybe you haven't done a lot of presentations and this is your first time, and of course, your first presentation is always going to be a little bit more scary. But sometimes it's also just things like having unrealistic expectations, this idea of perfectionism. And I've definitely been guilty of this before. I've already been thinking about all of the words that I've mispronounced in this workshop and thinking that if I had just thought about it for a split second longer, I could have done that more eloquently. But sometimes you just have to forgive yourself, know your audience isn't nitpicking like you are, and sort of say it's okay that it happened, learn from your experiences. Some people just have that personality that makes them more introverted than others. And so at first thought, there's like, I cannot public speak because I can barely talk to like a handful of people. How am I going to talk to a whole group of people? Sometimes it's like that, but also know that it's really hard to steer away from public speaking for the rest of your life. And at some point in your journey at York, you might have to do a presentation. So do know that you can still get better at public speaking. Maintain that growth mindset and know that if you practice and that you work towards it and that you're prepared, that you can still do it and that you're not naturally hopeless towards presentations. Sometimes people have bad past negative experiences. I'm sure everyone at some point has said something awkwardly and then just completely regretted it, and it comes up to mind in the middle of the night as you're trying to sleep. But again, just take that as a learning opportunity. Know that you're the only person who probably remembers it, and just learn from it for next time. And something that you can actually do about presentation anxiety is being prepared. And so that lack of adequate preparation can cause anxieties. It's something that you can turn around and work towards, and it will really help you calm those nerves. So how can we decrease anxiety? The first thing is to take control of your thoughts and talk back to it. So turn all of those I can't do this into I can do this. The next time you hear those negative and self-critical statements, just say stop and move on. Say next, I'm moving on. I can't do this anymore. Maintain perspective. Remind yourself that it's just an assignment. It's not life or death. Even if it seems like a big deal at the time, it isn't really the end all be all. And know that the audience is on your side, whether it is your classmates, even your TA and your professor are really just there to learn to see what you have to say. And if you're doing this for a peer leadership role, then just know that all of the peers here are supporting you.
Let's talk about some more about how to decrease that anxiety. First, you want to relax your body physically, because a lot of times our mental stress can be held in our body. So sometimes you can work through some different relaxation exercises. There's so many out there and we all learn differently. So really try and find what works best for you. It's okay if what works best for you isn't what works for everyone else. Maybe you can go onto YouTube and try a 5 or 10-minute meditation exercise, going for a walk around the block before you have to present, or something that's more of a regular practice or activity, such as yoga or Tai Chi, anything that will help you physically release this stress so that when you go to do your presentation, you're a lot more relaxed. Next, you want to talk about it. Gain perspective by discussing your anxiety and brainstorming constructive ways to handle future situations. Making sure that you're learning from every experience. It's okay if that first presentation isn't perfect. Just take notice of things that you want to turn into goals to work on for next time, and also reward yourself for the good things that you did accomplish in that presentation. Next is to practice. The more you practice, the more confident you'll feel with the content, with the format, with overall just presenting, and it'll really help you to find who you are as a presenter and give you that confidence going forward for that next presentation. On the actual day of presentation, remember that you have spent all of your time and effort preparing for this moment, that you got this. Remember to practice those breathing exercises beforehand and always think positively, remembering to catch those negative thoughts as they come in. Focus on the content of your talk and try your best to always slow your speech and stay in control. Sometimes nerves can make us really speed up how we're speaking, but like Cindy mentioned earlier, our audience needs time to absorb the content that we're giving to them. So always speak a little bit slower than you think that you need to really give that time to absorb the material. If you feel yourself blushing or sweating or feeling a little bit nervous, just ignore it. Chances are, especially in a virtual environment, you are the only one who notices this. So don't give any hints or clues that that's what's going on. Just take a breath, maybe take a sip of water to give yourself a moment to collect yourself, and go on with your presentation, knowing that you can do this. After the presentation, be kind to yourself. Like Cindy said, it's so easy to get wrapped up in those negative thoughts and those should statements of, oh, I should have done this in my presentation, I could have done this better. It's okay to recognize those areas that you want to improve, but really tuck yourself up and reward yourself for what you have just accomplished. Especially if you were nervous presenting, that's a huge accomplishment to just finish the presentation and come out on the other side. So make sure that you focus on the positives and focus on your achievement. Being encouraging and not disapproving. A really good way to focus on this positive self-talk is to treat yourself the way that you would treat a good friend. After a presentation, I would never say to Cindy, oh my gosh, that was so horrible. Why did you say that? You should have said this. So why would I say that same thing to myself? Try and envision as if you're speaking to someone you really care about and take those same positive statements and give them back to yourself. As well, think realistically about what went well and what could have been improved for next time, trying to be as objective as possible. Taking a look at things you want to improve is great, but just don't let it overwhelm you to the point that you can't focus on your achievement as well. Try to balance the good and the bad of every presentation. So here we have a presentation roadmap, which is going to be a little guide to success. To kind of recap some of the different points that we have gone over today. The first step to preparing your presentation is to choose your main message and focus on how you're going to support that message through your content, your format, your tone, your body language, and any supporting visuals. Step number 2, know your audience and their expectations. Remembering that typically your audience is other peers or other students. They want you to succeed, they are rooting for you, and they understand the struggle that you're going through. Next, determine how you're going to organize and structure your presentation, keeping in mind time management, and these are things that will depend on the format or the type of presentation like Cindy discussed earlier, whether that's individual or group. And lastly, you want to research your content like researching for an essay, remembering to include those three main sections of having an introduction, those body points that are your evidence, your supporting slides, and as well your conclusion.
And once you've researched your presentation like an essay, you want to choose the appropriate visual that will support that content and prepare those things ahead of time, whether that be a PowerPoint or your cue cards, whatever it is, just make sure that you have that ready. And then you can start practicing. Practice, practice, practice. Practice in the space that you're going to be presenting in, and just make sure that you're comfortable saying those words out loud. This is really important, but remember to double check your work and technologies. You want to make sure you catch any typos, any like awkward transitions between your slides. And sometimes that only happens when you've actually done it in presentation mode and not just scrolling through them. And also making sure that you're familiar with how Zoom works, or with how the computer that you're going to be presenting on works in whatever room that you're going to be doing it in. And then take a deep breath and know that you've got this. You've definitely practiced, you've put in the time and the effort. So now it's just time to sort of show that you know how to do it. So some key takeaways from our workshop are to first remember to understand your audience, give yourself time to practice and to continue to practice and to practice again, and focus on your message throughout. So thank you so much for attending today's workshop on presentation skills. If you ever do want to check out some other workshops, we have a whole list of them here. Things like time management, exam prep, reading and note-taking are some of our more popular ones. And don't forget that if you attend 8, including this one, you earn yourself a passport to success. So again, thank you so much for attending this presentation skills workshop, and good luck on all of those future presentations.